we are joined by Rebecca Weiser to talk about Albanese's PR disaster this week at the Women's Rally. Is Airbus Albo going to be a one-term failure? Let's find out. We are joined by Rebecca Weiser, regular columnist for the Spectator Australia and editor-in-chief at The Quadrant. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
It's lovely to be here, Alexandra.
Albanese's leadership, Rebecca, is in free fall. Not only does he have a failed race-baiting referendum under his wing, and blatant misinformation from Labor regarding energy bills during the election, all of this has caught up to him in the cost of living crisis. It's getting a bit grim for the Prime Minister. And just as these popularity polls have started to dive, the Prime Minister decided to attend a rally against domestic violence organised by the group What Were You Wearing? Now, this was a PR disaster. I mean, even the ABC has run the headline, quote, Anthony Albanese reminded how rallies have the ability to haunt the nation's leader. Now, that's as close as our $1 billion a year ABC is going to get to saying, whoops, what a total mess. Rebecca, was attending this rally a desperate move by a desperate Prime Minister?
I think the short answer to that is yes. Absolutely. I think the Prime Minister is desperately in search of distraction. So I think we can give him a double D as well as an F for fail. It really obviously was a chance to try and paint himself as, oh, look at me, I'm Mr. Nice Guy turning up here. Well, as even the ABC recognised, these things can have a way of getting out of control.
Well, nothing says a sensitivity around women's rights like the Prime Minister taking the mic while the female organiser appeared to cry behind him. If this had been Scott Morrison, let's be perfectly honest, it would have been the end of his career then and there. But Anthony Albanese, he lumbers around adorned with the plot armour of progressive politics. He only goes, when the faceless factional power brokers behind Labor say that he goes. And maybe it is time for Albanese to resign. What do you make of the rumours that Labor is seeking to replace Albanese, and use him as some kind of sacrificial lamb to erase their bad press? Is there anybody else there that you'd pick to run Labor, or are we scraping the bottom of the barrel with Albanese as it is?
Well, absolutely think we're rattling around at the bottom of the barrel. Labor has form, we have to admit. Indeed, so does the coalition, on this. So ever since, it seems, John Howard, we've been in this era where the people attribute it to social media. I don't know. I think it's in this case, I think there is a real lack of leadership. And the lack of leadership comes from the fact that people, and this Prime Minister in particular, just isn't prepared to articulate his values and then stand by them and then do the hard work of trying to persuade people. I have to say, I'm not sure that would be great, because I think his values, such as they are pretty extreme. But it's the shallowness of it all and the wandering around and the feeling that he doesn't really stand for anything that I think, makes people, shake their head in disgust and despair.
Well, speaking of standing, Albanese didn't stand for Sal Grover and the biological rights of women against a special class of privileged men who Labor says can push women off the sporting podium and use their bathrooms. Women's rights are sitting on the identity politics ladder of oppression, and they've been pushed right down. They're sitting somewhere just above, white straight men. Everybody else is stacked above women at the moment. But when it comes to Labor, thanks but no thanks. I think women are better off without their help. And just quickly to recap on the topic of women's rights, do you think that the evolution of women's rights in Australia under progressive politics is going forward, or are we worse off now than we were 20 years ago?
Well, one thing I think is sure is that, and I think this is always true, that rights are never secured or gained forever. They always have to be defended and indeed fought for. We see that not just with women's rights, where I think I could not have imagined the wholesale attack on women's rights now. Simple things like the right to compete against other women rather than having to compete against any man who identifies as a woman. those sorts of things would not have occurred to me. There's no doubt those rights are under attack, but so are really basic things like freedom of speech, like, you know, the right to express your opinion, like the right to broadcast things and to see things which actually happened, which are true, but which we are told for some reason are so dangerous that we're not allowed to see them. And we cannot, I think it's pretty easy to see how that would then be used to censor everything. I mean, it's almost like, you know, Stalin's policy of, you know, photoshopping the people he didn't like out of history. So rights are under attack. Rights are never forever. They always have to be defended.
Well, you are right. Progressive politics does not discriminate. It's attacking all rights equally, not just women's rights. But you've written an article in the Spectator called Punishing Petroski. It is in regards to the strange case of a scientist who has committed the cardinal error of using what you call academic brilliance, honesty and integrity during the COVID pandemic. Can you elaborate on that, Rebecca? What did he do to attract such scorn from the health mafia?
Well, he was honest, and clearly that will not do. He was Professor Petroski. His title of professor has been taken from him. He's still Dr. Petroski. But the treatment of doctors, scientists, researchers during the pandemic has been appalling. And while lots of people, indeed most people, think, oh, the pandemic is over and thank goodness. In fact, the persecution of people who simply tried to do their jobs, who simply tried to honour the Hippocratic Oath, who simply tried to tell the truth, that persecution continues, and that is the case for Dr. Petroski. He had the courage to, and was one of the first people to publish papers and to identify that the SARS-CoV-2 virus didn't sort of leap out of a Wuhan wet market, but had actually been passaged, or almost certainly had been passaged in a lab. And he explained why that was the case. That view is now widely accepted by most US agencies as being true. But from that time forward, we started to see, you know, that Professor Petroski, or as he was then, start to have trouble getting funding for the vaccine that he developed. He is also the only person in Australia who successfully developed a vaccine against COVID, a traditional vaccine. So you can imagine, well, no way this was accepted internationally. It was shown to have relatively few and no serious adverse events. It was used but in Iran. But no, it couldn't possibly be accepted in Australia. And we've seen ever since then the continuing punishment of Dr. Petroski, even to the point now where 2 years into a 5-year research program to find a way to vaccinate people against the cancer that they have, a very individualised way to try and sensitise the immune system and to wake it up so that it will protect an individual from the cancer that they are suffering, and for which he has had very good results. Despite that, he is being evicted from his offices and his research laboratories in Adelaide. It's quite shocking what's going on. It receives no coverage in mainstream media.
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that most Australians do not know his name, even though he developed a non-RMNA vaccine for people who don't want to try that, don't want to be lab rats for the big pharma trials. But in an age where we are told to trust the science, and where science is being used as almost a religious cult to tear down our, democratic institutions and replace them with this new eco-fascism, we have actual science being suffocated and jealously torn apart. You said he was a tall poppy that's been cut down, and they've gone for the whole scorched earth kind of scenario for him. Rebecca, is the age of science upon us, or is this more of a corporate and political age?
I think this is, we just talked about rights being under assault, the right to freedom of speech, the right of women's rights, but this is the right to practice science. And when you will not allow open debate, freedom of speech is absolutely essential in science, and that means the right to criticise to have scientific debate. And that's what we are seeing closed down. So I think what we're seeing is science being attacked and replaced with what I would call scientism. It's like, it's another ism. And this is a fake science, really, because unless you have the right to say, look, I think your experiment is wrong, and here is why, and here's the research, here is how I will show it, which is what we cannot do at the moment for so much in relation to anything to do with the pandemic, then I think you no longer have science. And I think that augurs very badly for the future of our civilization.
Well, you finished with a quote from Walter Mapp, and I quote, "Put the worst of men to command the bad. He gave additional authority and power to those who were wickedest in their attacks on the innocent, and promoted over all others those to whom pity was unknown." Now, in the comments section of The Spectator, someone asked, where's Petroski now? What's going on? Is he going to be able to climb back up the ladder, or has this scorched earth approach been quite successful?
I haven't talked to him in the last couple of days, and this is a story that is evolving day by day. But what I would say is that unless these decisions are reversed, and I think he's making a further legal appeal, he will have to leave this country. And he will not be the first scientist or the first great person who will be forced out of this country, but he will his work will go on. I think he may well end up in the United States. Some other country will probably benefit from his brilliance, and Australia will be the loser. But you know what? The people who are in charge of this couldn't care less. They would like to destroy him, and they're really not interested in science.
Well, just finally here, we've been talking a lot about Labor's attempt to censor the news, but also we must remember that Labor first tried to censor, and also the Liberal Party, to censor science. And during the COVID era, the censorship of science led to a lot of harm and victims being unable to tell their stories. Do you think that if we are going to go forward as a nation, and indeed a world that values scientific endeavour, do we need to think very seriously about these misinformation, disinformation laws posing a threat to the future of our scientific industries?
Absolutely. I think they pose a threat to our democracy and to our whole way of life. If we don't have the right to speak our minds freely, to say what we think, to criticise the government, and we even need the right to be wrong. And often these people that I have talked about who've been persecuted, I think they're right. But unless we can have these open debates, there is no future for our Western civilization, and we will be no different from the dictatorships and the tyrannies and the authoritarian governments that we see in so much of the world, and we will be all the poorer for it.
It'd be a great shame, Rebecca, for the great Western Enlightenment to die in silence. But thank you for joining us here today on Spectator TV and for bringing this to our viewers' attention.
Thanks so much, Alexandra.